Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. We are delighted and honored to host Dr. Moshe Bar, the renowned Israeli cognitive neuroscientist on Business Talk. Dr. Moshe Bar currently serves as the head of the Gonda Multidisciplinary Brain Research Center at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. He is also the former director of the Cognitive Neuroscience Lab at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Bar earned his PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the University of Southern California. He has received numerous awards and honors for his outstanding research and academic contributions, including the prestigious 21st Century Science Initiative Award from the McDonnell Foundation and the Hebb Award from the International Neural Network Society. Dr. Bar's research dwells into diverse facets of brain function, exploring areas such as memory, foresight, mental load, mind wandering, mood, and creativity. He has also made significant contributions to the concepts of conscious cities, emphasizes the impact of urban design on mental well-being. He has authored over 80 research articles, edited 2 scientific books, and published the acclaimed popular science book Mindwandering. In this episode, Dr. Moshe Bar will share profound insights from his book, Mind Wandering, how it can improve your mood and boost your productivity, creativity. Dr. Moshe Bar, it is an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you. I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak with you.
Dr. Bar, can you explain what mind wandering is and how it differs from other forms of thinking, such as focus, attention, or daydreaming?
Yeah. So first of all, by the way, I have to modify something in your very generous introduction. I'm no longer the director of our center. I stepped down a couple of years ago, but I am at this center. Yes. So mind wandering is a collection of processes. It really encompasses different types of mental processes, but I think what they all have in common is that they wander without a goal. They travel, they drift. And so daydreaming is part of mind wandering, but also mind wandering that's a simulation of a certain possible scenario in the future, or reminiscing about something in the future, or trying to find a solution for some problem that requires creative thinking. Worrying, not all mind wandering, we'll talk about it, but not all mind wandering is good. So mind wandering can include worries, these repetitive thoughts that we sometimes call ruminations, like in the case of depression. So it really encompasses a host of different types of thinking and different contents of thinking.
You discuss the cognitive processes behind mind wandering in your book. Could you share some insights into what happens in the brain during moments of mind wandering?
Yeah, so there's a large network that was discovered in the last couple of decades, and this is one of the biggest discoveries in modern neuroscience. And this is the discovery of what we call the default mode network, DMN. And what this network is characterized as is being very active when we're not busy with anything. So right now, you and I having a conversation, hopefully an intellectual conversation, it requires most of our mental capabilities. So the specific brain regions that are required for this conversation are engaged, and they don't really leave extra resources for doing other things. But let's say you're in a shower, or actually you're listening to a boring talk, or you're in a boring movie or in a traffic jam, and your mind has nothing better to do. So it starts to, we used to think that it goes idle, but rather instead it's very busy. And it's very busy in a very characteristic manner and in a very consistent network, which is called the DMN, the default mode network. So when we first discovered it, we as a community, there's a lot of good researchers involved in these efforts around the world, discovered this network that is very busy when we're not busy. It's funny, right? We're very busy when we are not busy. So you would think that given how much energy brain activation requires, it's metabolic energy, right? So given how much energy it requires, then when you're not busy, it will just go to sleep a little bit and rest and save energy for when you need it. But instead, it turns out to be vigorously active, and it's a giant, massive network. So from this logic and from this rationale, we figured out that it must serve a reason, right? We know evolution is pretty efficient. It won't have us spend so much energy if it doesn't serve some purpose. And that's why we started the quest for understanding what does the default mode network do. We know that this is the seat of mind wandering, but what exactly about mind wandering is happening in the default network? This was the majority of research that me and my friends were engaged in last couple of decades.
Many people associate mind wandering with creativity. How does mind wandering contribute to our creative processes?
Yeah. So actually, when I wrote this book, I was having the impression that actually our society is not so happy when we wander, right? You have to, probably your mother would tell you this, oh, stop being so lazy, go do something with yourself, or you're just staring at the ceiling before we had phones. But I'm not sure there was much recognition that mind wandering actually is a good process. But you're right that now we know that and this is part of the thing that I tried to accomplish in the book, was to explain the benefits of mind wandering. And one of them is creative thinking. The idea that we can work on a solution for an interesting problem that cannot be solved in a regular manner, or if you're an artist, you don't solve any problem, you just have this great. So we have to understand something about the creative process. Creative process benefits from something that we call creative incubation. So we need to stop thinking in a sense, right? You have a problem, it's like, okay, this is the best I could get with it. Let me just go do the dishes, right? And in the background, this default mode network continues to grind and to look for creative solutions until you say, aha, here's a solution, right? And I'll tell you a little more, and I'm sure your listeners are interested. Everybody's interested in the creative process. So let me expand just a little more. So you can think about the creative process like a diamond. Okay, so initially there is the opening of the thinking. We call it divergent thinking. So in this phase, you entertain a lot of possibilities. You entertain a lot of possible solutions. And just like I consult to people that do business and think about brainstorming sessions with their workers, I like to say that the boss shouldn't be in the room. Or it's metaphorically speaking, but the idea here is that there shouldn't be a censor in the room that says, this is a bad idea, this is a stupid idea, this has been tried before. Similarly, in the brain, in this phase of divergent thinking, in the first part of the creative process, you just shoot in all directions with all the possible ideas, okay? And then after you've created enough solutions, there is the closing of this process. We call this convergent thinking. And now you employ a more rational thinking, and you start to evaluate all these ideas that you've activated in your crazier mode, and now you're more thoughtful. It's like, okay, this is bad, this is going to be very expensive, this is not going to work, and then you choose the one solution that really is helpful. All these things happen without you really directing them. This is what's beautiful about the creative process, that it's like you say, aha, I know, I have a solution. And there's almost a subjective feeling of some, magical influence that kind of touched you and told you the solution, but it was your subconscious or your kind of grinding in mind wandering and in a default mode network that gave rise to this solution. And it just kind of nudged you on the shoulder. Hey, I have a solution. And you say, aha, this is how I should build this chair. So it's critical for my model. Is critical for creativity. And when my kids were younger, I would just encourage them not to do anything. And this was odd, it seemed at last, but at the beginning. But the idea is really to nourish these processes that give rise to our creative thinking. Otherwise, we're just busy with doing, and not really creating new avenues. Yeah.
How can mind wandering be linked to problem solving? Can it help us solve problems we are consciously struggling with?
How do what? Can you say it again?
How can mind wandering be linked to problem solving? Can it help to solve problems we are consciously, struggling with?
Yes. So Part of what I just said about the creative solution is really part of problem solving. But sometimes there are problem solving like, there's a math issue, right? There's a math question and you need to solve it. Actually, these specific solutions we think about them as goals, and it's not necessarily mind wandering, because if I have to tell you, give me 5 words that start with W, right? So you actually turn off mind wandering and you turn off the default mode network and you go to your lexical areas, language areas. So this is a problem you solve. Or I tell you, what's better to take, this loan or this loan? And you have to calculate percentages. Then you actually shut off the default network and the mind wandering, these intermediate processes. But if you have this lingering problem, this lingering decision to make, this is where the incubation takes place. And even if the solution is not super creative, but it does take place in the background, it does take place across some long processes, and then you got the solution. So so this is part of the decision-making process.
Dr. Bar, in your research, do you find that mind wandering plays a role in processing emotions or managing stress?
Yes, that's a very good question. So it does help you recognize emotions, but sometimes it actually exacerbates them. Makes them even worse, their effect. Sometimes you're dwelling on some negative feeling you have, and it kind of increases, and you accelerate, and you amplify it. But in terms of stress relief, there is the idea that, well, I can say a couple of things here. First of all, we do, this idea, some of them are mentioned in the book, led to the development of ideas of how to treat mood disorders such as depression. And we actually opened a startup company that developed an app that now is on the App Store. It's called MoodBloom. And the idea is to employ the same thoughts we have about mind wandering, how it creates all these big associations, creative thinking, into improving mood. And it's very cool and it works very nice. And we proved it also in not only scientific papers, but also in clinical trials. So this can help you improve mood and also kind of alleviate anxieties and other things. But I would say also that, I'm a big fan of your country, of India. I traveled there a couple of times, and I'm hoping to be there again in February. I love, this is probably my favorite country to travel in. And some of it is also the culture I was exposed to through practicing meditation and going to Vipassana retreats. So there you realize that a lot of the efforts and the practices that you train in meditation is actually to quiet down the mind wandering and quiet down. Sometimes they call it the monkey chat or some kind of useless chat that goes inside. So the idea is really to quiet down your mind wandering and your default mode network in a way, not to make your mind empty, but to make your mind empty of noise, empty of prejudice and pre-existing knowledge kind of interfering with your experience of the present and of the world. So on the one hand, as I said before, with our approach to mood, also in anxieties, harnessing the default mode network and mind wandering towards drifting in your thoughts to good places and to expanding your thinking and being busy with creative and with broad processes is good for alleviating this. But on the other hand, the whole meditation world talks about, let's quiet down, let's turn off this system for a while, and let's see how it affects our experience.
While mind wandering can be beneficial, it is also associated with negative outcomes, such as increased anxiety or rumination. What are some of the potential downsides and how can we mitigate them?
That's also a good question. So as I alluded to before, I'm a big fan of mind wandering, and most of it is actually beneficial. But you're right that when we worry, when we dwell, when we ruminate on the same thinking, we go over and over, it's very repetitive, this is counterproductive, okay? And in many cases, it's outside our conscious control. So if you think about some poor soul that suffers from PTSD, from post-traumatic stress disorder, you know that they really wish they could get rid of all these intrusive thoughts. So they try to think about a beach vacation with their family, and then some bad memories interfere and kind of make them anxious and depressed and beside themselves. So mitigating is not, I don't want to pretend that this is an easy thing and you just boom, when it's a mental disorder, it's a mental disorder and it should be taken seriously. But as I said, with our attempts to alleviate symptoms of depression and anxiety, we've noticed that if you engage people, for example, one thing that we do in this app, that again emanates from our research, is to encourage people to think broadly. Okay, so let me give you an example, even without emotional words. So somebody who ruminates can generate, is akin to a chain of words such as chair, table, tablecloth, utensils, plates, wine bottles, glasses. So all the words are inane, but they all stay in the same context, right? A more creative person, somebody who's in a better mood, and this is something interesting that we found a connection between positive mood and creativity, would say chair, table, wood, tree, forest, camping, bear, honey, right? So they expand. So by having people expand more and more in their thinking, we kind of eliminate your thinking pattern from being stuck. So the depressed and the anxious mind is stuck around the topic of rumination. But if you practice and if you train them to think more broadly, then they don't dwell. They just go broader and broader and broader. So that's the idea.
How can individuals harness the power of mind wandering in their daily lives? Are there any techniques or habits that can encourage productive mind wandering?
So in this book that you have behind you, my editor kind of encouraged me against my will to have an appendix with a lot of it's not really daily tricks, but the idea here is really to think about how can we translate this into everyday life. So I try to be practical as a scientist. I'm not too practical in the sense of, go have 2 oranges a day and do some push-ups and eat this and run there. But there are some as close to tips as you can provide about how to harness the power of mind wandering. Yeah.
You highlight the relationship between mind wandering and focus attention. How can we strike a balance between the two, especially in a world that demands high productivity and attention to detail?
Yeah. So you're right with the choice of words, especially with the word balance. So we need this and we need that. And then there's another concept I introduced there. This is based on our research, is state of mind. So we can be in a very focused state of mind and we can be in a very broad state of mind. And each of these have their advantages and disadvantages. So in a narrow state of mind, you're very attentive to details. For example, you see the trees, all right? You see the trees, you're focused on the trees. But when you're in a broad state of mind, you see the forest. You think about the world in more global terms. And there are benefits to this and to that. So the idea here is to recognize what context you're in and what kind of state of mind it calls for. If I need to balance my tax sheet or listen to a friend or take notes from a very speedy lecture, I know I need to be focused. But if I'm sitting under a tree or on the beach or just in my living room and I don't have anything pressing to do, then I know I can be broad, I can be thinking about the world in global terms and think about how what kind of new opportunities I can provide to myself and new solutions. Yeah.
Dr. Bar, what are some of the most exciting areas of future research in mind wandering? How do you see this field evolving in the coming years?
Well, I think that, well, maybe I'm not objective, but the two directions that I think are most promising, I mean, I'm not objective, but at the same time, because this is my research, but at the same time, I have enough evidence from the interest that I see around from both from the general public and from scientific community. So the idea, and these are two topics that really interest society and impress society. So one of them is creativity. How can we harness mind wandering? And you look around, you'll see conferences and books and lectures about creativity all around the world. So everybody wants to know how to be more creative. And this is sweet. I like it. It gives you optimism about the human race. The other thing is, how can we harness it to improve our mental well-being, right? So the world, in many respects, is more and more depressing. There are many great things about the world, but there are also aspects that are more and more depressing. And how can you use the proclivities and the characteristics of mind wandering and default mode network to improve your mental well-being and anxieties and depressions and mood? Yeah.
Dr. Bar, my last question. Finally, how has your understanding of mind wandering impacted your own personal life and work? Have you made any changes in your approach to thinking and creativity after researching this topic?
Yeah, so a few things. First of all, some of the feedback I've received from people who read my book and also from my friends who've heard about these ideas earlier is that in a way I gave them permission or the scientific support for staying in bed extra 15 minutes and just staring at the ceiling, right? There's advantage to not doing. So of course, if you're busy, you need to feed your children, you need to go to work, you need to do things. Of course, we have to be productive members of society. But these breaks in between have a lot of value. So I learned to appreciate them. And this I knew I was a dreaming child. So I've known this for a while now, but kind of disseminated to my children, to my friends, and to my readers, the idea that it's actually good for you to daydream and to mind wander, as long as you don't recognize there's some worry and rumination. Then you really have to stand up, move, and do things. So I do employ this in my everyday life, and also, with regard to creativity, I know that certain states facilitate and promote creativity more than others. So I know if I'm in a good mood, it's a good state to look for creative solutions than when I'm in bad mood. But if I'm not so good mood, I know this is the right time to focus on a boring task or another task that requires some focusing. So in the book, I do talk about the differences between states of mind like this and how to recognize when should we be in what state.
Listeners, thank you for joining us on today's episode with Dr. Moshe Bar, where he shared invaluable insights from his book, Mind Wandering, How It Can Improve Your Mood and Boost Your Creativity. Dr. Moshe Bar, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you for your invaluable contributions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.